everyone, welcome back for another deep dive. And today we're going to be looking at something a little different.
Oh.
This time we're going to be tackling death in Venice.
Oh, fantastic.
That classic novella by Thomas Mann.
I love this one.
Yeah, you shared some really great summaries with us of all 5 parts.
Right.
And we're going to be using those summaries to kind of unlock the structure of the story.
Great.
And really dig into some of those big themes like beauty and desire and even mortality.
Yeah, it's really remarkable how Mann uses that 5-part structure to mirror
Right.
the protagonist's journey throughout the novella.
Mm-hmm.
Each part kind of reveals another layer of Aschenbach's internal conflict.
Yeah, definitely. And speaking of conflict, we meet our main character,
Right.
Gustav von Aschenbach, in part 1, and he's this incredibly accomplished writer. He's at the peak of his career, but he feels this kind of emptiness.
Yeah.
This nagging sense of unfulfillment, like he's reached the top of the mountain, but the view isn't quite what he expected.
Exactly. He's achieved all this external success,
Oh, yeah.
but internally he's struggling.
Right.
And it's interesting how the story begins with him near a cemetery, of all places.
Yeah, why a cemetery? I mean,
It's almost like Mann is subtly hinting that this journey is about more than just a change of scenery.
oh,
It's a journey into the depths of the human psyche, a confrontation with mortality itself.
wow. Yeah, I hadn't even thought about it that way. And then he has that strange encounter
Right.
with that mysterious man in the cemetery who seems to embody this kind of exotic allure.
That's right.
And I think that's really what sparks his desire to travel, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. That mysterious figure acts as a catalyst,
Yeah.
awakening a longing within Aschenbach for something beyond his very controlled and disciplined existence.
Right.
He's so focused on reason and order, that Apollonian side of life, that he's neglected the Dionysian,
Mm-hmm.
the realm of passion and instinct, and it's like this little seed of desire has been planted, and
Right.
it's beginning to grow.
It's so fascinating how Mann introduces those concepts right from the start, the Apollonian and Dionysian.
Yeah.
It really makes me think about the struggle we all face between, head and heart,
Absolutely.
logic and emotion. Have you ever felt pulled in those two directions, like wanting to follow your passions, but also feeling the need for control?
Oh, all the time, right? It's
Mhm.
such a universal human experience, and I think Aschenbach's journey in the novella becomes a cautionary tale
Okay.
of what can happen when those forces become imbalanced.
So Aschenbach decides to travel.
Right.
He's looking for something to fill that void within him.
Yes.
But that initial trip to the countryside, it kind of fell short.
Right. It's too predictable.
Yeah.
It's too tame for his restless spirit.
Yeah.
He needs something more.
He craves something more intense, something more stimulating. And
When-
that's when he makes that really impulsive decision to go to Venice.
Yeah.
This city's steeped in history and art and beauty, but also known for its decadence. That underlying decay, what a perfect setting for a man on the verge of this internal crisis.
It really is the perfect backdrop.
It's brilliant how Mann uses Venice as the symbol.
Yeah.
It's a city of contrast, just like Aschenbach himself. You have this dazzling beauty, but then there's this sense of decay, this lurking danger. And upon arriving, he even hears those whispers of an illness spreading in the city.
That's right. That's the foreshadowing.
Right.
Those little hints of unease and danger
Yeah.
that will become more and more prominent as the story unfolds.
Have you ever noticed that in other stories that you read where like a little detail from the beginning
Oh, absolutely.
like suddenly takes on this whole new meaning later on?
All the time. It's like those moments when you're watching a movie
Right.
and you think, wait a minute, that seemingly insignificant thing from earlier,
It's all connected.
it's all connected. You want to go back and re-examine everything.
Exactly.
And Mann was a master at weaving those intricate layers of meaning into his work. He wanted his readers to think, to question, to really delve beneath the surface of things.
So we have this really intriguing setup, this restless artist fleeing a life that feels empty, drawn to this city that's both intoxicating and potentially dangerous.
Right.
What stands out to you about this initial part of the novella?
Mm.
And what are you most curious to see unfold as Aschenbach kind of embarks on this journey?
For me, it's the way Mann captures that complexity of human desire.
Okay.
Aschenbach is this man of intellect and discipline, yet he's driven by these primal urges that he can't control.
Yeah.
It's a reminder that even the most rational among us are susceptible to the power of beauty and longing.
That's a really good point, and it makes me think about how we navigate those desires in our own lives.
Right.
What are the boundaries that we set for ourselves,
Yeah.
and what happens when those boundaries are tested? I'm really eager to see how Aschenbach's internal conflict plays out
Me too.
against the backdrop of this captivating and unsettling city as we delve into part 2.
Yes. Let's dive in. Aschenbach's journey to Venice, it's filled with these subtle but unsettling encounters.
Yeah.
Almost like breadcrumbs leading him towards his fate, don't you think?
Yeah, it's like Mann is carefully constructing this atmosphere of anticipation
Yeah.
and unease right from the start. And one moment that really stuck with me was Aschenbach's encounter with that peculiar red-haired man on the ship.
Oh, yeah.
Desperately trying to appear younger than he is. It just felt so symbolic.
It's a brilliant example of foreshadowing.
Right.
The red-haired man with his exaggerated youthfulness and his slightly grotesque appearance.
Yeah.
It's like a mirror reflecting Aschenbach's own anxieties about aging and his growing obsession with beauty.
It's almost as if Aschenbach is witnessing a distorted version of himself in that encounter.
Exactly.
And speaking of distorted reflections, his arrival in Venice itself,
Yeah.
it's described so vividly with those like labyrinthine canals and decaying palaces.
Right?
It's beautiful, but there's this underlying sense of decay, of something not quite right.
Mann's prose is so evocative in those passages.
It is.
He uses these rich sensory details to create this palpable atmosphere of beauty and decay.
Yeah.
Remember how he describes the smell of the canals?
Mm-hmm.
That strange mixture of seawater and flowers and something faintly foul?
Yes. It's like the city itself is this living, breathing entity,
Right.
both alluring and repellent.
Absolutely. And like any complex character, Venice has this dual nature,
Yeah.
this light and shadow side. It embodies the seductive power of beauty,
Mm-hmm.
but also the inevitability of decay and death.
Yeah. Yeah.
And Aschenbach, drawn to the city's beauty, he seems almost oblivious to the dangers lurking beneath the surface.
Yeah, it's like he's willfully ignoring those whispers of illness,
Mhm.
the rumors of cholera spreading through the city. He's so captivated by this idealized vision of Venice that he's blind to the reality,
Yeah.
to the potential for danger. It reminds me of those times when we fall head over heels for something or someone,
Yeah.
and we just choose to overlook those red flags, those
Mhm.
warning signs. Have you ever experienced something like that?
Oh, I think we've all been there at some point.
Yeah.
That feeling of being swept away by something, whether it's love or ambition, or even just a beautiful idea,
Yeah.
and ignoring the potential consequences.
And that's what makes Aschenbach's story so compelling, right?
Absolutely.
It's a reminder that even the most brilliant minds can be seduced by their desires, even to the point of self-destruction.
Exactly.
And speaking of seduction,
Uh,
we're introduced to Tadzio in part 3, this young Polish boy described as the embodiment of youthful beauty.
yes.
He becomes the object of Aschenbach's fascination. What do you make of this character? And how does Mann use him to explore these themes of beauty and desire?
Tadzio is such a fascinating and complex character. He's almost like a living statue,
Mm-hmm.
a figure from Greek mythology come to life.
Okay.
Mann uses these incredibly evocative descriptions, comparing him to Narcissus Hyacinth, even Eros himself. It's as if he's presenting Tadzio as this ultimate object of aesthetic contemplation.
And the way Aschenbach observes Tadzio
Right.
from a distance at first is almost voyeuristic.
Yes.
He's captivated by his beauty,
Mm,
but it's a beauty that he can't possess, that he can only admire from afar.
right.
It's like he's trapped in this cycle of longing and frustration.
That's a great point, and it really raises the question of what exactly Aschenbach desires.
Yeah.
Is it simply the aesthetic appreciation of beauty,
Mm-hmm.
or is there something more complex, something darker at play?
I think it's a combination of both, wouldn't you say?
Oh, absolutely.
There's this undeniable erotic undercurrent to his fascination with Tadzio,
Yes.
even though he tries to rationalize it as this purely artistic impulse.
Of course, and that internal conflict, that tension, that's what drives the narrative forward.
Yeah.
Aschenbach is torn between his Apollonian side,
Mm-hmm.
his dedication to reason and order, and then his Dionysian impulses,
Right.
the pull of passion and desire.
It's a struggle that plays out not only within Aschenbach himself, but also in the setting of the novella.
Exactly, the duality of Venice, the
Yeah.
beauty and the decay.
Yes.
It mirrors Aschenbach's own internal struggle, and as his obsession with Tadzio deepens,
Mm-hmm.
the atmosphere of Venice itself seems to become more oppressive, more claustrophobic.
It does. It's like the city, once a symbol of beauty and escape, now starts to feel like a trap.
Right.
And as the cholera outbreak worsens, it becomes this breeding ground for disease, both literally and metaphorically.
Exactly. And it's interesting how, even as the danger of the cholera becomes more apparent,
Yeah,
Aschenbach chooses to ignore it.
he does.
He's so fixated on Tadzio that he's willing to risk his own life, his own reputation, everything.
It's like he's entered this state of delirious obsession where reason and logic no longer apply.
Yeah.
He's completely surrendered to his desires,
Yes.
even though he knows they may lead to his destruction.
Which, of course, leads us to part 4,
Right.
where things really start to unravel for Aschenbach.
You mentioned earlier that Mann uses foreshadowing throughout the novella.
I did.
What are some of the key moments in those first 3 parts that hint at Aschenbach's downfall?
Well, the encounter with the red-haired man on the ship,
Yeah.
as we discussed, that's a powerful example.
Right.
But there are also those subtle hints about the cholera outbreak,
Mm-hmm.
which Aschenbach initially dismisses.
He does.
And then there are those moments when he observes Tadzio and his thoughts become increasingly obsessive, even feverish.
Yeah.
Mann's language becomes more intense, more sensual, reflecting Aschenbach's growing infatuation.
It's as if the language itself is mirroring Aschenbach's descent into madness.
Exactly.
It makes me wonder how much of what we're experiencing is Aschenbach's reality.
Right.
And how much is a product of his own distorted perceptions.
It's a fascinating question.
It is.
And it gets to the heart of what makes Death in Venice such a complex and unsettling work.
Yeah.
It's a story about beauty, desire, and mortality, but it's also a story about the power of the mind to create its own reality.
I'm so eager to see how those themes play out in the final 2 parts of the novella.
Yes.
As we move into part 4, what should we be paying attention to? What are some of the key moments or symbols that you think will be crucial to understanding Aschenbach's ultimate fate? So in part 4, this is where we really see Aschenbach's obsession with Tadzio just completely spiral out of control.
Yes.
He's totally abandoned any pretense of restraint
Right.
and is openly following Tadzio all around Venice.
He's completely consumed by this desire. Remember that scene where he visits the barber?
Yeah.
Trying to recapture his youth with hair dye and makeup.
It's such a poignant scene. You know,
Yeah.
he's so desperate to hold on to this illusion of beauty,
Yeah.
to deny the reality of his aging body. He's literally trying to transform himself into something he's not.
Exactly.
It makes you wonder, is he trying to become more appealing to Tadzio? Or if it's more about his own internal struggle with mortality?
I think it's a bit of both. He's trying to deny his own aging and perhaps subconsciously trying to bridge that age gap between himself and Tadzio.
Right.
But of course, it's a futile attempt. True beauty can't be manufactured
Right.
or disguised.
And all of this is happening against the backdrop of this worsening cholera epidemic.
Right.
The city is literally decaying around him, yet he seems totally oblivious to the danger.
He's chosen to ignore that very real threat to his health.
Yeah.
Instead, he's choosing to dwell in this fantasy world that he's constructed around Tadzio.
It's a classic example of how desire can cloud our judgment
Absolutely.
and make us blind to reality.
And in a way, it's almost like the cholera becomes a metaphor for Aschenbach's own internal state.
Oh, okay.
You know, he's decaying from the inside out, consumed by this obsession that's ultimately destroying him.
That's such a good point. The physical decay of Venice mirroring the moral and psychological decay
Exactly.
that Aschenbach is experiencing.
And it's interesting how Mann uses the cholera to heighten that sense of tension and claustrophobia. The city, once a place of beauty and escape, now becomes a prison.
And then in part 5, we reach the climax of the story.
Yes.
That unforgettable final scene on the beach.
Such a powerful and evocative scene.
It is.
Tadzio bathed in the golden sunlight. He becomes almost godlike, a symbol of both beauty and the unattainable.
Right.
And Aschenbach, weakened and delirious, watches him from a distance, his heart filled with this mixture of longing and despair.
And there's that brief moment of connection when Tadzio glances back at Aschenbach.
Yes.
But it's so fleeting.
It is.
And then Aschenbach collapses and dies, still gazing at the object of his obsession.
It's both beautiful and tragic.
It really is.
Aschenbach's death on that beach,
Yep.
with Tadzio as his final vision.
Right.
It raises so many questions about the nature of beauty, desire, and mortality.
It's interesting how even in death, Aschenbach is still fixated on Tadzio.
Right.
It's like his obsession has transcended the physical realm.
I think you've hit on something really important there. One way to interpret the ending is that Tadzio becomes kind of psychopomp.
Okay.
You know, a figure who guides souls to the afterlife.
Okay.
He's leading Aschenbach not to a physical destination,
Why?
but to a different state of being.
That's a really fascinating interpretation, and it makes me think about the title of the novella, Death in Venice. It's not just a physical death,
Right.
but also a death of the spirit, a surrender to those irrational forces of desire.
Exactly. And it makes you wonder, What is it about beauty
Yeah.
that has such a profound effect on us? Why are we so drawn to it,
Mm-hmm.
even when we know it can be dangerous, even destructive?
Those are questions that philosophers and artists have been grappling with for centuries.
Right.
And I think Aschenbach's story provides such a powerful and unsettling answer. Beauty can be a source of inspiration and joy,
Yes.
but it can also be a track leading us down this path of obsession and self-destruction.
And perhaps that's the ultimate message of Death in Venice, that we need to be aware of the power of beauty to approach it with both wonder and caution.
This has been such an insightful deep dive into Death in Venice. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts and interpretations with us.
It's been a pleasure.
It's amazing how a novella written over a century ago can still resonate so deeply with us today.
It's a testament to the enduring power of great literature.
Absolutely. And I think the questions raised by Death in Venice about beauty, desire, and mortality
Yes,
are as relevant now as they ever were.
I agree.
Well, thanks for joining us on this deep dive, and until next time, keep exploring.